Hey, what is going on, everyone? This is Seth, one of the co-hosts of Engage Podcast, to give you my world-famous announcements and then get to our fantastic episode today. First of all, if you're new to the podcast, I want to go ahead and just say welcome. If you like today's podcast and you want to hear more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, whether this is on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Podcast Addict, YouTube, wherever you're listening to my voice, hit subscribe. That way, you don't have to look for us every Thursday. It's going to be on your phone waiting for you to listen. It's the fastest and easiest way to download this content and have it right there on your phone. Also, if you haven't had a chance to come out yet to our outside services, there's still plenty of time. We've extended the dates to go back inside because the outside services are just so loved by so many, and numerically we just continue to grow. And it's been, it's just been a blessing to everyone, myself included. So 11 a.m. Faith Presbyterian Church, back parking lot. We're starting a new series, not this Sunday, but the next Sunday, called While on the Road, Jesus. And it's a short series about people who have had encounters with Jesus in the Bible. And I could tell you one thing. Me and Pastor Anthony sat down a few weeks ago and kind of mapped out what the series is going to look like. And I could tell you, as a staff member and also as a listener, I am so stoked for this particular series. And again, that's starting not this Sunday, but the next Sunday. So come out and check that out. If you have kids, bring them. There's a playground in the back of the church by the pavilion they can play on. If you don't have kids and you don't feel comfortable really socializing or getting out of your car, that's completely okay. There's a lot of people who stay in their car, have the AC running, and then they listen to us on the radio. So you got to come check it out. It is such a great time. And if you haven't come out yet, you're missing out. So our guest today is a fantastic individual. Me and Pastor Anthony had such a great time talking to her, and we could have gone on for another hour. I loved hearing her that much. Her name is Margaret Lucas. She's an attorney here in Mercer, PA. And she's just a remarkable person. She's a trailblazer for sure. And after today's episode, you'll find out why. It was her episode that made us realize, we should have a mini-series dedicating and lifting up strong women like her. So give it up for our friend, Margaret Lucas.
Welcome back to Engage Podcast. We are so excited to continue our series, Leader to Leader, where we sit with folks in the community that are leaders and influencers. Today we have the privilege and honor to have attorney Margaret Lucas here with us. How are you today?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Good to see you. And Seth, how are you today?
Very well. Very good. Go ahead.
You look a little bit sweaty to me.
It's hot outside.
It's hot.
It's really warm outside.
You have a sweater
More
on.
sense than you think. Well, that's because I sit in air conditioning in my office all day. And it's usually colder, but yeah, I've got sleeveless when I'm not sitting actually in the office.
Yeah, it's warm in here. And I know we have air conditioning in the church, but somehow they rigged this thing not to shoot air in. So it's really hot in here in the summer.
Very hot.
And then it's going to be really cold in here in the winter. In the winter, yeah.
Yeah.
That's how much we love you.
I'm not sweating because I'm nervous.
No.
Or excited. It's just hot.
Yeah. Good. So we were chatting a little bit beforehand, and you said that things are kind of like, quote unquote, a madhouse, right, at work?
It's been really crazy at my office. By the time we actually started going back into court and actually meeting with clients again face-to-face, which I've just started in June, with lots of precautions. Everybody has to wear a mask. The doors are still locked. You have to knock if you have an appointment, and then we let you in. And then I have to sanitize everything after everybody leaves. And so it's been more than a little bit of an adjustment.
Yeah. How have you adjusted personally?
Relatively well, I think. I continue to work in my office because I own my building. It's a freestanding house. It's basically in Mercer. and I have one full-time staff person and one part-time. So staff all stayed home from March through beginning of June, and I came into the office every morning. So it wasn't a whole lot different for me. All of my computer stuff was there, all my files, etc. And my husband and my son were still at home, so actually there were fewer people in my office than there were in my home.
Yeah.
And I was still doing hearings to some degree online for those months, over the phone and informal conferences, but I was all client meetings at that point were over the phone. Just the court things, some of them were in person or were over the phone.
So you were pretty well isolated.
I was.
Yeah.
And the office was locked and nobody came in, and I, like I said, wasn't doing any face-to-face meetings. So it wasn't a whole lot different. Got lots of work done.
What has been the challenges through this whole COVID deal and adjustments in terms of being an attorney?
People have been, well, my practice is exclusively family law. I do nothing but family law, haven't for quite a number of years, and I limit my practice to Mercer County. People have been really, really stressed. They've been stressed financially, they've been stressed emotionally. A lot of couples that were maybe kind of at a tipping point, unfortunately, this really tipped them over the edge.
Yeah.
So I've seen pretty much a growth in my practice, unfortunately, some additional divorces that might not have happened otherwise, very candidly, are happening. A few more custody issues that we've had before, good bit of adjustment in the support area because people have had income adjustments that we've needed to deal with. So it's been a lot. I've seen really, and I feel really bad because a lot of people are very stressed and really having a hard time adjusting.
Mm-hmm. So you're located in Mercer County?
My office is in Mercer Borough itself. I own one of the larger old Victorian houses off the square, have been there for 15 years in that office and about 20 years as a solo practitioner. As I said, I limit my practice to family law, which is custody, divorce, support, grandparents, domestic violence, anything really to do with families and kids. I also limit my practice now to Mercer County. I used to practice in many of the surrounding counties when I first started working, but over the years my practice has grown enough here that I don't need to leave county, and it's just much more convenient since my office is only a block and a half from the courthouse.
Right. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, all that good stuff.
Well, I was born and raised in West Virginia, right outside of Morgantown. My parents divorced when I was 6, so I have a little bit of a background personally in family issues. My mother moved my older sister and I to Uniontown, which is south of Pittsburgh. We lived there for a number of years. Then my mother remarried, and my stepfather and mother moved the family here to Sharon, which is where we lived when we first moved here. My mom worked for the osteopathic hospital in Farrell. Now it's one of the UPMC hospitals. And my dad worked at Sharon Steel. Mm-hmm. So I graduated from Sharon High School in 1976, went to Penn State Shenango, which I really liked, and then up to Penn State main campus, which I didn't like. I liked Penn State, but it was awfully big. I was an English major, and I had an awful lot of really big classes. I didn't like that. So I ended up transferring back and graduated from Thiel College, which I really liked. Thiel was wonderful. Nice, small environment, great support from faculty. And once I graduated from Thiel, I went to Duquesne Law School.
And your undergrad was in English?
English, yes. I have a bachelor's in English. And then I went straight into law school to Duquesne in Pittsburgh and did 3 years at Duquesne and came out with my JD.
What inspired the leap from English to attorney?
It's not actually that big a leap because as an attorney or as an English major, you read, you write, you communicate, which are the things you need to be able to do when you're a lawyer. You have to be able to read a lot. You have to be able to digest what you read and organize it quickly, and find the focus, the really important things in what you're reading and what you're hearing, and then to be able to communicate effectively with people back, whether it's your client, whether it's the court. So it's really a pretty common undergraduate degree for law school.
My Uncle Nick was an attorney.
I knew your Uncle Nick.
Did you graduate with any of the other Claditis crew?
I don't think so.
You just knew Uncle Nick?
No, I knew him. He was a number of years older than I, and practiced. I knew Ruth Ann Bagley and he were practiced together at one point, but I did know your uncle before he passed.
Did you know I had an Uncle Nick that was an attorney up here?
Nope. No idea. Doesn't surprise me, though.
Yeah, he passed away suddenly.
It's been a long time, too.
He went for a while. He was always super healthy. You know, when he'd come to the house, and my mom, she would have more food. You know how it is. There's food. It would fill this fellowship hall up. And I just can still remember Uncle Nick saying, you know, Mom wanted to make your plate. 'Cause that's the way how it goes. And he would always say, you know, one of that or that's fried, no. And very particular. He'd go for walks, very healthy. His wife, Aunt Rita, she was a nurse. I don't know if she still is or she's retired, but so very healthy. And just one day, I think he was walking at Buell Park, and they found him at his house, I think outside, and he just died. So it was crazy.
Wow.
Yeah. I think I was either in 10th grade or a senior in high school. I can't remember.
How old was he?
Oh, he would have been, in his 50s?
Yeah.
He wasn't very old,
No.
as I recall.
No.
Young. Oh.
Everyone, one of the cool things is, you know, when you're young, we had such a huge family, so he was on the radar, but not, because, you know, you're into, like, the wild, fun uncle, you know. But as you get older, and since I've moved here, and I don't, you know, I'm his family, but I've never heard anything but that he was all positive. He was a great guy. Just that makes me feel good.
Yeah.
You know, it's been always great feedback on Uncle Nick. So it's a shame that he was taken that early. So, yeah. Okay, so thinking about your life and your influences, reflecting. Certainly, there has got to be, you know, influences in your life, those that have influenced you, whether for good or bad. Who are those people, and not just who, but why? You know, what are the qualities that you admire in them? Just share a little bit about those folks.
Probably one of the greatest influences would be my mother. She was, when I was in high school, she worked in the bookkeeping department at the hospital, the osteopathic hospital. And that's what her background was. And this would have been early to mid-70s, maybe. At that point, they decided that they wanted to bring computers in. There hadn't really been much computerization at that point, certainly not in the hospital, and they were looking to do that primarily for their payroll department. So one of the managers there approached my mother about whether or not she would be interested in doing that. Keeping in mind, this is early 70s, so there aren't a lot of women doing anything in computers. There aren't a lot of people in general doing anything in computers. But she said, sure, she would be willing to try that. So she was in her 40s maybe at the time, and they sent her to Atlanta, to the IBM Training Center at the time. Keeping in mind, of her class, she was the only woman.
Wow.
So she would go for a week or so at a time, and they would, you know, she'd do various classes, training on various IBM things. And once they had her with the training, they bought the equipment, and the room where her computer equipment was huge. I mean, it was 2 or 3 times the size of this room.
Those pictures you see of the old computer that's gigantic?
Absolutely. The floor-to-ceiling, wall-to-wall, 20 feet long, 15 feet high with the big platter discs on it and the punch cards that you would input the information by punching holes in little cardboard cards and then feeding them into the computer. I distinctly remember watching her with some of the staff that she was supervising doing that, and writing the programming. I mean, she was actually writing programming, which again, back then for a woman to do was very unusual. My mother had always worked. My sister and I grew up with my mom working, and it was not anything unusual for us. A lot of times we would come home from school and there'd be a note on the table that would say, there's chicken in the refrigerator, do something. And so my sister and I are both very good cooks. And I think that's probably one of the reasons why we're good cooks, is because we had to figure out what to do with the chicken, among other things. And my stepdad was Italian, so he was a great cook. And we learned great cooking from my stepdad and my aunts and uncles on his side.
Are you still enjoying cooking?
Oh, I love to cook. That's one of the things I do for relaxation.
Yeah. For yourself or for the family or just whatever?
Actually, I like to cook for friends. I like to do dinner parties. And I do cook on the weekends. I don't cook a whole lot in the evening because by the time I get home, I'm pretty tired. But on the weekends, certainly I like to try different recipes and do different things.
I saw someone posted something on Facebook, and it said, I didn't know that a large part, you'll recognize this, they said, I didn't know that such a large part of being an adult was just figuring out what to cook every day for the rest of my life.
Yeah, that's so true.
I can understand that. So during the week, it's not really anything too spectacular, but on the weekends, and especially if I'm cooking for friends, my husband and I have 3 or 4 couples that we spend a lot of time with, and I love nothing more than to come up with some very elaborate menu.
Are you getting inspired, like watching, those celebrity chefs?
Oh, yeah.
Are you watching them and getting inspired?
I do some. I don't watch too much television, sometime in the evenings, but not a whole lot. I usually I love cookbooks, and I have shelves full of cookbooks that I will review, and something that looks interesting.
If you could eat at, give me or give us your 1 or 2 top chefs who you like, and if you could eat at the restaurant, you'd say it'd be this one.
I would like to have dinner at the Inn at Little Washington, which is in Virginia, and I think it's one of the few 3 Michelin star restaurants in the country. And I'd like to eat at the French Laundry in California.
So those are the 2.
Those are the 2 I'd really like.
Are you going to make it happen? Like eventually, or just...
I might. You never know. We might get. I mean, right now they're hardly even open. But yeah at some point I would like to do that.
You said you ate at
Gordon Ramsay's.
That would be interesting.
I ate it. I was his main restaurant in Las Vegas, and then his bistro. It's more like a burger joint. It's inside of Caesar's Palace, and both of them were amazing.
Indeed.
It's just exactly how you'd picture his food tasting is exactly how it is.
Does the burger yell at you when you bite it like he does?
No, but if you ever watch his shows, when he bites into a burger, he always does the delicious. You bite into it, that's that voice comes out.
Okay.
Because it's just, honest to God, that was the best. Both places, his restaurant had the best burger I've ever had by far. And then 1 to 10, I would give it a 10 out of 10. And then when we went to his restaurant, I had, what is it?
I remember. The beef Wellington.
Oh,
the
that's
beef Wellington?
his signature dish.
I'd have to get that too.
That's his signature dish.
Let me tell you, I'd never had it. I always wanted to try it, and it melted in your mouth. It was.
Can you make that?
I have made beef Wellington before.
Is that difficult to make?
It is. It's tricky to get the puff pastry so that it's crispy and not soggy on the bottom, which can be difficult. And you have generally a duxelle of mushrooms on it. And oftentimes, I don't know if does he do a piece of foie gras on the top? Okay, I've done it with that as well.
Wow.
So it's a tricky dish. Probably one of the nicest restaurants we've been to was for my husband and my 25th anniversary. We went down to Nemacolin Woodlands, which is not far from here.
Yes.
Fabulous resort. And they have a restaurant called Le Tech, which is really, really elegant. I mean, it's fairy food. It's the multiple courses of little itty bitty bites of things that are just amazing flavors and combinations, and and things that you bite them and they aren't what you think they're going to be, and it was a fascinating meal. It was really neat.
So it's so funny that you mentioned, how do you say nemacolin?
Nemacolin?
So my wife was just looking at that because for my wife's family is a really big family, and we were looking for like a resort place to go to during the spring or the summer, and we just discovered it, and I'm like, how have I never heard of this place?
How far away is this?
Very expensive though. That's the only drawback.
Yeah.
It's on Route 40 south of Pittsburgh, Uniontown area. One of the nice things about it is, and especially if you're going to go maybe even for a weekend or whatever, there are 2 Frank Lloyd Wright buildings there. There, of course, is Falling Water, which is famous and has been there forever, right outside of that area, and also another house called Kentuck Knob, which has just been open to the public probably 5 years. But one is Falling Water is one of his early places, and Kentuck Knob is much later. So it's interesting to kind of see his evolution as an architect. That's a pretty area. You've got Youghiogheny River down through there, and Ohio Pile. It's a nice area.
I was just shocked at the amount of activities and stuff to do there.
The Laurel Highlands is very nice.
It was mind-blowing to me. And me and my wife were both like, how have we never heard of this place? And one of her friends from high school actually was the one who told her about it. And she was like, it's definitely pricey, but when you're there, you don't feel like you're wasting money. Like you get what you're paying for. Like,
oh yeah,
and
there are several different places you can stay at Nemacolin, and they've got the really really expensive ones, the Chateau, and then they've got some lesser expensive ones.
Yeah, they have little family cabins there and all that.
And condos that you can rent in the area. And of course, you're not that far away from Seven Springs for skiing and the summer things they have. It's a pretty area.
Well, cool. Thank you for sharing that. Really, not just for us, but for those listening, out there. If you're in the Western PA-ish, area, or even a little bit further out, Google one more time?
Nemacolin Woodlands.
Yeah, check it out. You might want to.
It's about 3.5 hours from here.
Okay.
So it's kind of funny because we were just talking about the fact that when we put these podcasts out, the site that we use to distribute all of our episodes to iTunes, Spotify, Google, all that, it not only does it tell us and show us what percentage of people listen on their phones versus computers, so you can kind of get to see what app people are actually using the most of. But one of the things that's really cool is it actually breaks down geographically where people are listening from. And we have this explosion in Washington, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
That's interesting. We have just as many people as of today listening in from Washington, Virginia than we do from Hermitage, Pennsylvania.
That's bizarre. I wonder how it's
just
up there.
Crazy.
That's
so
that's
even if you live in that area,
I'm wondering because of my college. I wonder if there was a group of folks that live around there. It
must be.
But let's jump. I want to jump back to influences real quick.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. We're talking about food, which is it comes up in every episode.
It does.
So, would you say that your mom? Would you categorize her as like a trailblazer in a sense?
I think so. Absolutely. I think she certainly was, and continued to work at the hospital for quite a number of years until she retired. Even after it, she ended up becoming the head of the data processing department. And when as they continued to computerize throughout the hospital, she was responsible for all of that, moving beyond just payroll into everything else. And now you can't walk into a hospital without a computer every time you turn around. Mm-hmm. So she was very much ahead of her time.
Mm-hmm. So your mom, is there anyone maybe outside of family, like culture or influential authors or anything like that, or?
I don't know if there was anybody particularly beyond that. Recently, I've become very interested in Ruth Bader Ginsburg. watched her movie. Fascinating, again, trailblazer that she was in the areas that she did in law. And locally, certainly Annabelle Jones was, I won't say notorious because that kind of has unfortunate connotations, but Annabelle was an attorney here in the county. She practiced in Mercer. She had been practicing for quite some time when I first started, and she was very, very helpful when I first started to practice. I was probably maybe the 6th or 7th female attorney in the bar. We didn't have very many when I started to practice. Annabelle had an office in Mercer. She never went to law school. She worked and back when you could do that, she worked as a secretary for the Stranahan law firm in Mercer for many, many years. And she then sat for the bar. She simply took the bar exam, which you could do when she did it.
And there's a time where that stops? In other words, where
you can't do that anymore. You have to have a law school degree before you even register and sit for the bar.
When about did that change?
Oh, that's probably been 40 years ago at least.
Okay.
But Annabelle never went to law school, but she sat for the bar and passed, and then opened her own practice. She did a lot of family law as well, and was quite influential within the county. She was certainly very well known in her area.
Wow. Fascinating. I never knew that. So it's another cool piece of history here in Mercer County. Yeah.
Very cool. So I have to ask, 'cause we've had attorneys and lawyers in here. I'm always fascinated as to what made you want to become, or I'll put it this way, what made you want to get involved in law?
I always liked to argue. My mother will tell you that. And it was and my grandmother, who was a school teacher, and another somewhat of a trailblazer, but she was my teacher in 3rd and 4th grades. I had her in grade school. She had always wanted to go to law school. But of course, when she was finishing high school, which she did at age 15, and going on to college, women didn't really go to law school back then, especially not. She was from California, which is Washington County, again, south of Pittsburgh, small town. Women either became nurses or they became teachers, and that was the acceptable thing to do. So she went into education, became a teacher, worked for many, many years, but she always wanted to be an attorney. And she used to talk to me about that when I was younger. So when I was kind of finishing up my junior year, getting ready to go into my senior year of college, I'm trying to decide what I wanted to do. I really knew I didn't want to teach, but the question became, what else did I want to do? So I took the LSATs, which were the law school entrance exams, and did pretty well on them. So simply decided, well, I'll give law school a try. And that worked out well.
So it's funny because it's like hearing these two people, the folks that influenced you. You have your grandma that planted the seed, right? And you watched your mom kind of go out in new territory. So like she had the courage to go out and do something that was uncommon. So like you put them together, and then here we are.
That's kind of where it came from. So
then, jokingly, what's it like at home? Because now to people, because you think of like my mom. I already said like we're all about the food. My mom was the head of the cafeteria, and for 2 reasons. One is she could watch over Anthony and Andrew. Okay, and the second reason is because that's her thing. I mean, and she rose up to run the whole thing. She was amazing at it. But translating that at home, I didn't have to come home with mom, the attorney. And like I can imagine the conversations, and I could be totally wrong. It's like you got to make your case, right? Is that not, or is it mom? Is it mom? Just like I'm turning this off, and no.
It tends to be. It depends upon who you're asking. Now I don't do that too much with my husband because that's not fair. But certainly with my boys, I did that. My older son is 30. My younger son is 26. Both had enough sense not to go into law. My older son is an electrical engineer and works for a company that my brother owns and runs, and they do medical imaging equipment. So he installs and maintains MRIs and CTs and things like that all over hospitals and doctors' offices. My younger son just completed his master's in social work. So he's a little bit more kind of what I do, not quite so much. The older son, Ian, is very much his father's son in terms of the engineering and the very logical thought. And Connor tends to be more communication and feelings and that kind of thing. But yeah, they both knew that if they wanted to do something or wanted to convince me of something, they better be prepared with their case. They better have all of their logic lined up. They better have their reasons ready to go. And then I would discuss it with them. So.
But I can see that when you're young, that driving you crazy. But I think that's one of those things, maybe, that as you get older, you say, wow, I'm really glad that I was kind of raised that way. But you have to be older. You have to go through that, to appreciate, like, yeah, you know what, Mom? You really taught me a lot.
Yeah.
Here.
Well, I'm saying, like, I always joke with my mom that she missed her calling. She should have been a prosecutor. Because, like, just anytime me and my brother ever got into trouble, the way she'd always, like, grill us, I'm like, I feel like I'm on the stand. Like, So, man, like, if my mom wasn't, like, an attorney and I can't even imagine. But, yeah. So, with those influences that you had, how do you in what ways have those influences made you the person you are, and also how do you think those influences have made you successful in your field?
Well, I think they certainly have influenced me to go out and do the things I want to do, even if they're not necessarily traditional. As I said, when I started to practice, there were probably a handful of women in our bar. Unfortunately, there's still not a whole lot more.
Is there a bond there? Forgive me if I sometimes jump in and out, but is there a bond there?
Yes. Those of us who do practice here in the county and all, we do try to support each other. And especially as some of the younger women have come into practice, I certainly try to be supportive of them, reach out to them, because I had several people who did that with me. Annabelle Jones, Ruth Ann Begley, Brenda McBride, some of the 3 or 4 that were here before me certainly made the effort, and I've tried to do the same. But I think it's made me willing to do the things that you need to do. After practicing for 2.5 years with a firm in Greenville, well, actually he was a solo practitioner, Mike Halliday, I had heard there was an opening at Routman Moore, Goldstone, and Valentino, which at that time, which would have been the mid-'80s, was one of the largest firms in the county, such as it was. We never had very big firms around here, but they had 7 or 8 attorneys, all men and all partners at the time. So I approached Joe Valentino, who was the senior partner and the mover and shaker in the county at the time, and said, I hear you have an opening, I'm interested. And he kind of looked at me and laughed, and then said, okay, fine, send me a resume. So I sent him out the resume, and they had a 3-attorney group that was interviewing for the position. So I was interviewed by those 3 attorneys, and then called back for a second interview with the entire firm, which at that point, again, was all men, and I believe there were about 7 of them. And I was married at the time, didn't have any children yet, but was married at the time. And one of the more senior partners said, so what does your husband think about you working? And one of the other partners said, you can't ask her that question. And he said, I don't care, I want to know. So I said, well, I got married between my 2nd and 3rd year of law school. I certainly think my husband realized I was going to practice, that I wasn't going to law school just for fun. He thinks it's perfectly fine.
Right. He's happy.
But keep in mind, that was back late 80s, and that doesn't sound like that long ago, but it really was to a great degree. And then I got the question of, well, what are you going to do if you have children? And I said, well, I'm going to keep working. My mother did. Why shouldn't I? And in fact, I did.
I think so much has changed because, like, hearing those things, like, it's so bizarre to me. That almost sounds like a joke, like it can't be real, but it was real.
It was real, and
Like,
not that long ago.
Yeah.
Not that long ago when you think about it. And when I was looking for a job initially, I had a very hard time finding a job in Mercer County. The women that were here, they were working primarily with family-related firms. Annabelle and her niece were practicing together, and Brenda McBride practiced with her dad and her brother. So there was this familial relationship with most of them, very few women on their own. And the one group that will remain nameless that I applied to, I guess the comment was made when they were reviewing applications, well, the only woman we want here is one who makes the coffee or types the briefs. And that was it.
So did that light a fire in you that it fueled you, right?
Irritated me.
Yeah, sure. All right.
I ended up working for a gentleman in Greenville who was on his own. His son was working with him, but kind of in the process of moving out. And he basically just said, well, okay, whatever you want to do, go ahead and do it. I didn't have a whole lot of guidance or training, but I ended up doing a lot of bankruptcy. I did a lot of family law work, did some real estate. And those are the things, for much of my practice, I did about 60-40 family law and about 40% bankruptcy. And then I've kind of dropped off the bankruptcy over the years. But I did a lot of that. So then when I was hired at Routman Moore, I was their only female attorney forever until the firm dissolved.
Did that become a thing where you were now a huge asset to them?
I think so. I think there was a benefit because there were clients, especially in family law matters, who wanted a woman. Whether it was a woman who wanted a woman to represent her, or whether it was a man who wanted a woman to represent her so that it didn't look like he hated all women, just his wife. So it worked out pretty well.
Yeah. Fascinating. That's really cool. That's
Very,
good.
yeah.
I like how one of the themes that we have through a lot of these interviews is people facing obstacles. And instead of the obstacle defining them or sort of them seeing the obstacle and then shrinking away, they did what you did, and you saw it as a roadblock, but you're going to go over it, above it, through it, underneath it.
However,
you took the challenge straight on, and
Absolutely.
that's a really cool theme through all of these interviews. The people who've actually kind of went out and accomplished whatever you call it, their dream or whatever it is, there's always these one or two big obstacles. And they said, I'm not going to be defined by that. I'm going to keep going forward until, I can make this thing happen.
I've noticed that too.
And that's what you do.
Yeah.
So even though times are different, if someone were to come to you and say, I want to do what you do, you inspire me, I want to be just like you, I want to be in the same field as you, what advice would you give them? What things would you tell them to watch out for? What things would you tell them to go for? What would you tell them?
A lot of it depends upon what they want to do and where they want to do it. If you want to practice in a small town or in a small county like Mercer, then you better know the business end of things too. Just knowing your profession doesn't do you any good, because other than probably 2 firms that I can think of now in the county that have 5 or 6 attorneys, everybody else is either a solo practitioner or maybe has 1 or 2 attorneys together. So you not only have to know your profession, you better know the business end of running your business. And that's something I've learned since going out on my own 20 years ago.
And that's not something that they're teaching you. That's something you get out and have to learn.
Well, it is and it isn't. A lot of law schools are being more sensitive to that now and recognizing that you've got to teach the business end of a practice in addition to just the cases and how to write a brief and how to research and that kind of thing, which is good. But that's something that you really need to take an accounting course, for God's sake, because you're going to have to be able to do accounting. And if you don't want to have to pay somebody to do all of your accounting, then you better be able to do it yourself. So, do that kind of thing. Know how that kind of thing works would be something I would certainly suggest. No, if you're looking to be a tax lawyer in a big firm in Pittsburgh or New York or wherever, you don't necessarily have to worry about that. Because you're not running the day-to-day business end of it.
Right. Well, and that translates to back in undergrad for ministry. They're training you, and I'm glad they're getting more keen on that now. And who knows, maybe they are now in the youth ministry stuff. But everything was so relationship focused, and that it should be. Your main job is making connections with people. But there's so many things that they left out that you go in and you're going, I just spent 4 years in undergrad or 4 years in seminary, and it's like, why didn't you train us to do that? You know that this is going to be a huge part of our job. You did it. I think back to my professors, like, you were a pastor for 50 years. You know that all these people graduating are going to have to do not just A, but also B. Why didn't you teach us about B? So now you get out there and you feel like a failure. I know there was things that I had to learn myself. Some of them in particular was Robert's Rules.
Yeah.
It was like, is that the 67th book of the Bible? It's like, it was untouched, And so I got really freaked out before I started here. And one of the things I did is I contacted a lot of my pastor friends. I said, I need to know, when is your session meetings? And they're like, why? I said, I'm coming and I'm sitting. I'm not going to say a word. I just want to observe. And so I would just go sit with one of these legal pads and just take notes.
Sure.
And in reality, you don't use a ton of it, but you got to know what you're talking about and how to lead a meeting.
Sure.
So I think that's a good question.
Well, I was going to say, you said it best. You said in Bible college and seminary, they taught you how to write a 3-point sermon, but they didn't tell you how to run a meeting.
Right, an effective meeting.
Like,
and you're doing that meeting 2 or 3 times a week.
Which you still have to do.
Right? And you get out there and you're dealing, your elders they're smart, they're educated, they're successful, and now they just put all this thought and process and stock into you, and you go there and you sit down and you kind of look like an idiot.
Yeah, it's funny.
And it's like, what? And then you think back to your professors, and you're like, why'd you do this to me?
Yeah, that's neat that there's the connection there.
Sure.
And, yeah. We can ask?
I have another good question here. I think it's a good question. So, one of the things I find fascinating about your field is, so for me, on Sunday, I will prepare all week for the sermon, right? I go out there, I preach the sermon. If the sermon is a good sermon, by and large, that's me. Like, I have the strength of making something really good or really bad. It's up to me. One of the things that I think I would struggle with immensely, and I want to get your perspective on this, is you're dealing in a field where you can do all that work and have everything right and be right, but you're now at the mercy of somebody else. I don't know, how do you deal with that? Is it not a big deal for you? I don't think you're going to say, I get the feeling you're going to say it is a big deal because just who you are. I'm like this too, but I don't know that I would be able to deal with it. Like, that would be so hard for me because I'm in a sense control of, right? I sit down, I do all my work and all that, and I go and I'm in control and oh yeah, I did it. Like, I hit it out of the park, with God's help, right? You're at the mercy of now another person.
It's very frustrating. And it's very frustrating for the client as well, for both of us, because especially in what I do, I'm dealing not only with my own client, but I'm dealing often with the opposing attorney and always the other side in terms of the other client, and either a judge or a master or someone else who's actually making the decision.
Right.
So for various reasons, no matter how brilliant I think I might be or might have presented my case, that doesn't necessarily mean my client's going to get what they want. And a lot of times I would disagree vehemently with what the judge did, but you can't change that. And that can be very, very frustrating. Years ago, I had a custody case, represented a dad. We'd done 2 days of trial on the custody. My client wanted his child desperately to go to St. Mike's in Greenville. And mom taught at Jamestown. She wanted child to go to Jamestown. So we tried the case. Judge ordered, child can go to St. Mike's. Dad picks him up. He takes him there, whatever. So about a month into the school year, client calls me. He's madder than anything because mom has just said, fine, I'm not doing this anymore. It's stupid. I don't agree with it. I'm not doing it. And I've enrolled the kid at Jamestown. So I go into court on a contempt, and this is one of our judges who is now long retired, who was also, I dearly loved him, Mike Wary, who was quite a character. And we did the contempt hearing, and the judge looks at the other attorney and goes, your client's clearly in contempt, and I'm going to assess X dollars in attorney's fees. And I got up feeling really wonderful. It was marvelous. My client was going to love me. And I looked at the other attorney and I said, my client will be at your client's house tomorrow morning to pick child up for school. And the judge goes, nah, I don't think so. I went, pardon me? He said, no, I don't think so. I said, wait, Judge, you just found her in contempt because she's not following the order. He goes, yeah, I know, but it's my order, so I'm not going to make her anymore. I'd won the case. The judge said I was right, but then chose not to follow his own order. I nearly lost my mind. I probably said some things that I shouldn't have, which was, excuse me, Your Honor, but that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life, which was very inappropriate. Kind of slammed out of the office, waiting for someone to arrest me, which they did, unfortunately. But about an hour later, the judge calls. And I said, first, Your Honor, let me apologize profusely. My behavior was inappropriate. It was unprofessional. I never should have spoken to the court in that manner. And he goes, oh, it's okay. Don't worry about it. He goes, I was a little bit worried about you. You seemed upset. And I said, well, yes, I was upset. And he goes, well, and you were right. He said, but I had to do what was best for that child. And your client would have adjusted to the fact that the child was going to Jamestown. She wouldn't have. And I would have had this child in this stress every day before he went to school, and I couldn't do that. Now, the logic was there. But again, it's one of those things where somebody else makes the decision.
Has that gotten easier for you over the years?
Yes and no. It's something you have to learn to adjust to. You can't, especially doing family law, because it's very emotionally fraught, always. Even over little things. I've had clients calling hysterically because one of the parties trimmed the child's bangs. I mean, literally sobbing to the point they couldn't breathe. And I said, does the kid still have both ears? Come on, you got to be a little more reasonable.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, you have to learn to leave it at the office to a great degree, or it will make you crazy.
That's got to be a rough one, I'll tell you.
It has its moments.
I say any profession where you're dealing with people just make it difficult. And that's...
Yeah, they do, and it's their lives, and I understand that it's their lives, and their kids, and it's the most important thing in the world, and the things they've worked hard for, and all the rest of that. It's tough.
Now, one of the other things, and I always see people who have what I would call intimidating jobs, like the one that you have. You get people who are lawyers, people who are doctors, like those people just, like, they amaze me. And one of the main reasons why, and I want to ask you this, is there's a lot riding on your shoulders. Mm-hmm. There's, like you said, there's people's lives are there. The future of kids, how, whether or not the outcome of this particular court hearing is going to change their personality. It could have positive and negative effects. When you go into a court, do you actively try to keep that in the back of your head so that you know that what you're dealing with is people's lives, or do you try to block that out? Because I would be someone who that would intimidate me, so I would try to block it out. But someone like my wife, I'm picturing her, she would be the one who would be reminding herself that I need to take this seriously. I need to keep that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you have to do the best you possibly can within reason, because you've got to strike that balance between you're doing the best you can for the client, but yet you have to not allow that to overwhelm you. Lawyers have huge percentages of depression, alcohol use, drug use, etc. Again, just because of the stress and strain of the practice. So that's something that you do have to balance and be aware of. When I was a young lawyer, I went to a seminar and a fellow spoke about the stress and that kind of thing, how you balance what happens. And I remember to this day, he said, I'm going to leave you with one thing. If nobody dies, it's no big deal. And he goes, and I mean that seriously. If nobody has died, you can fix it. It may cost you some money. It may cost you some embarrassment. It may take you some time, but you can fix it. So do the best you can, but understand that if somebody's not dead, you can fix it.
So in other words, as your approach as an attorney, in other words, here's what we got here. You may not like it. It may not be perfect, but we're going to go back and we're going to try to fix these things.
And especially with custody things, custody is never permanent. There's no such thing as a permanent custody order. They're always subject to modification. And you always, not that it still doesn't have a huge effect, and you try to certainly do what's best for the child regardless. But there are things that you can revisit as time changes.
I think that's a good way of lessening the stress in your life as an attorney, because no matter what, I know you asked that question, but you feel it, right? You feel
absolutely.
it. And working with those families,
Right.
it's heart-wrenching.
Right.
So I think you having in mind that, but also as a counselor, because a lot of what you're doing, you say you're a counselor, right? You really are. Like, that's an important thing to say to a family. Like, hey, look, you're not going to get everything you want, right? But once whatever happens, we can always tweak.
Right.
You know, as long as we're always focused on, okay, this isn't serving the best interest to the kids, we're going to make a tweak.
Yeah.
We're going to make a tweak. So that would help a person sitting there too, because you think it's like the end of the world, you know.
Very much so.
All right. This is a good conversation. I got lost. We have all kind of questions here, but
So you talk about if the client isn't dead, it could still be fixed. So can you tell us of a time where you did make a mistake, or you may have tried something and failed, and how you overcame it and how you learned from it?
that's a good one.
Well, I will give you a prime example of something that was not successful, was my recent judicial campaign. I worked my tail off last year running for judge. We had 2 openings, and I was one of the 4 or 5 candidates in the primary, made it through the primary, and there were 3 of us went through to the general, and I was not successful. I worked hard. I worked harder doing that than I think I've done anything else, including continuing to run the full-time practice and be at every fish fry, pancake breakfast, Chinese auction, and you don't realize how big this county is until you go to every Grange fair in the world. And visit with them all and walk in all the parades and all the rest of that. It was the worst thing I ever did. It was a great experience. I got to know a lot of wonderful people. I had so many people who were so supportive that I mean, people that I didn't know and that I got to meet as a part of the campaign. And that they were just fabulous. And that's the kind of thing that is wonderful. It was very disappointing not to be successful for a variety of reasons. But it's something that you have to just say, okay, fine, I learned from this and I'm going to move on, because otherwise you'll make yourself crazy otherwise.
Yeah. That's a huge endeavor.
It was major. It was 2 solid years of my life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Every evening, every weekend.
Oh, it's all consuming.
It
Plus,
was ridiculous.
You have underneath that, you have a regular practice,
Sure.
which on any day is way busier than most people anyway.
Right.
Would you consider doing that in the future?
Probably not, for a variety of reasons. Number one, I'm getting to the point where I couldn't serve a full term because of age. Judges have to retire at age 75.
Okay.
And it's a 10-year term. So I'm getting to the point where I would age out. I would not have run had I not been able to do a full term, because I just don't think that's right. And unless there's a significant change in the climate politically in Mercer County, it's probably not going to be productive. So.
Okay, so a couple questions before we conclude. Looking in the future, let's say 10 years from now, 15 years from now, what is Margaret Lucas doing? You're cooking.
I'm cooking.
In
No,
Italy
I'm
or something.
cooking. I'm gardening. I'm traveling, I hope. Probably semi-retired. 10 years from now, I may still be practicing. I know lots of attorneys who are still practicing at that point. So I would probably still be practicing. I'd like to hope by that time perhaps I've found an associate who can come and work with me and eventually take over the practice. I'd like to be working less than I'm working now, and perhaps traveling some more and doing things like that. But probably still doing what I'm doing. I don't see retiring anytime in the immediate future.
That's because you found a calling.
Right.
Right. Okay, now I'm going to change the question up on you. Let's pretend we can go back in time.
Okay.
And you run into your former self. You're 15 years old. What advice do you give yourself?
Oh, my goodness.
Yes.
Oh, my goodness. That's a tough question.
All right, take a second.
Don't be afraid to jump in and do what you want to do. It will work out one way or the other. It may not be exactly the way you think it's going to, but it will work out. When my firm dissolved at the end of 2000, I'd been a partner for 6 or 7 years at that point with my firm. And at one point, it looked like a couple of us were going to go out and start a different firm, and then that kind of didn't pan out. I ended up going out on my own. Pretty much last minute, not a whole lot of planning. In fact, I worked out of my sister's spare bedroom for 2 months until I could find office space that I wanted in Mercer, because I wanted to be in Mercer. At the time, I was going out of my mind. I didn't know what to do. I'd never run a business before. But as it's turned out, it's been the best thing. I like doing what I'm doing. I like being my own boss. I like not having to ask anybody else what to do or how to do it. I make the decisions as opposed to having to talk to 5 or 6 other people and discussing it to death and then still really not making a decision. I look at the issue and say, okay, I'm going to do this. We do it. So I would probably tell my younger self, even though you don't think you're worried about it, you're scared about it, sometimes you jump because you don't have a choice.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing.
I love that advice. I guess if I were going to summarize that, there's a Latin phrase that says, fortune favors the bold.
There you go. And sometimes you're not intentionally bold. Sometimes you're unintentionally bold.
That's right. Yep.
Very cool.
Well, listen,
This is
I
great.
think that's a great way to end our show. We've been talking for an hour, which I feel like we should have like a part 2 piggyback off of this,
know.
because there were some really cool things we talked about. Thank you for your time, attorney. You've been fantastic here. And Seth, as always good to have you. Sitting next to me is my sidekick.
Yeah, thank you. It's good to be your sidekick.
Thanks, buddy.
Thank you, gentlemen. It was fun. I enjoyed it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Well, this is Anthony Clauditis here at Faith Presbyterian Church. We are signing off for the week at Engaged Podcast, and we look forward to our next interview, Leader to Leader, next week. I hope you have a blessed week. Talk to you later.